I want to bring the best I've got to bring in this very short period I have on the planet. And if I can have a group of men who are going to call me on my bullshit, I certainly want that in my corner.
Hi, and welcome back to the Smart Couple Podcast, episode 78. I'm your host, Jayson Gaddis, and I am all about growing and developing myself so that I can have the most outstanding relationship possible. And once I do that, more is possible in my life. Right? In my marriage, my partner is like, when we're connected, it's like I have two rocket boosters on the side of me, right? And when we're disconnected and we're not doing well because we're in a fight or one of us is hurting and we can't find our connection, it's like I'm operating in my life without one of those rocket boosters. And I'm just not as strong. It's very strange. And some people would call that, codependent, and they'd have another number of different labels for it. It's fine. I don't care. I just know from my own experience that more is possible when my partner and I are working our connection in a strong way. And so all the more reason to learn how to be connected and to have both rocket boosters plugged in to each other. Okay. And it's strange, but our connection, I call it the secure home base. And when that is strong, more is possible. And if you've partnered with someone for a really long time, you notice this, right? That when you're plugged into them, you can do more. And when you're unplugged because of drama, fighting, etc., life is already hard, and now it just got harder. Because now you have to go home to stress, relational stress. Your home is harder to be in. It's harder to sleep next to this person because your nervous system is seeing them as a threat. So we do the work on ourselves so that we can have that go away and we can work through that. You can't work through that shit if you don't know how and you don't learn how. It's really straightforward, guys. Okay. So here at The Smart Couple, I bring on guests and couples and my wife, all with the intention of helping you not only get what you want relationally, but to dream your life together in a stronger way, to empower each other, to use your partnership as fuel for your own wholeness, awakening, and development. Okay, it's exceptionally powerful. It's the most powerful path, really, I've found, and I've studied with lots of teachers, and I've done lots of solitary practice. So I love relationship as a path, which is why I teach a course called that, by the way. And anyway, I'm fired up, right? Now, in this episode, it's really for the men, and the women, you're going to like this because you're going to hear two men talking about men and relationship dynamics from a male perspective. So I think you're going to find this helpful also. But I really care about serving up the men and pointing men to great resources. So today, one of my guests is that. He's a great resource for men. He's just an awesome guy, and he's doing a lot of cool work in the world. And that is John Wineland. So I'm going to read a little bit from John's bio. For the better part of a decade, John Wineland, an LA-based men's group facilitator, speaker, and teacher, has been guiding both men and women in the realms of life purpose, relational communication, sexual intimacy, and embodiment. Known for his groundbreaking work with men, John travels worldwide teaching his vision of embodied men's work and a deep relational practice. In 2014, he founded the New Men's Work Project, which has attracted men from around the world looking to develop as leaders in their relationships and communities. The project is committed to the staggering goal of creating 1,000 men's groups worldwide in the next 10 years. Okay, so this guy is got some bold visions. He's up to some really cool stuff. He's worked with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and TED speakers, creatives. And it just seems like, I haven't personally attended his events, but it just seems like he's a solid man at helping men. And yeah, I'm psyched. He gave a talk called What Men Are Craving. It's a video. It's like 10 minutes long. I will include it in the show notes so you have it. It's definitely worth watching. It's going to raise your eyebrows a little bit. And it may cause you to disagree with him. It may be a little uncomfortable for you to listen to. And I'm curious where you'll stand, so you can leave comments in the show notes. Okay. Now, a little context here. Why would I bring on a guest like John when we're talking about relationships? Well, John works with couples. He works with sexual intimacy. He works with polarity. He works with men and women. And his focus is men and men's groups. He's really good at that. Sounds like that's his wheelhouse. He's studied with teachers like David Data, and he's done a lot of, quote, spiritual practice, and he's a deep dude. So I think you're going to get a good hit of him here. And I speak to this in the interview. Why does a guy need to consider men's groups? What's the big deal? Why bother? What's going on there? In this episode, we answer some of those questions. And I think you're going to like what John has to say. And from my own experience, remember, I was in a men's group for about 6 years with a group of unbelievable men. And also I led men's groups for years here in Boulder, Colorado. I led a men's leadership training for 3 years in a row. And my blog, if you go back far enough, every post in the beginning was for men, about men, because I was all about serving men. And long story short, I moved into the relational space for a number of reasons, but I love men's work, and I really appreciate men who are helping other men, because I feel like us men are a little bit behind women when it comes to the relational space and our relational development and our relational maturity. So I love helping men, and John does too. So I think you're going to dig this one. As always, stay tuned for the action step at the very end, okay? And make sure you go check out John's work. And if you're a man, I would really consider working with John at some point. Here we go. All right, welcome to the show, John Wineland.
Hi, Jayson. It's good to be with you, man.
Yeah, great to be here. I'm psyched to pick your brain, man, on men and your journey and what's going on with the brothers out there.
Good. Yeah, no, I'm my favorite topic. I'm glad to go wherever we go.
Okay, cool. So, John, part of the reason I'm having you on the show is because you help men through a number of workshops and practices and coaching. And I always love interviewing men like you that are just helping men, because I'm grateful. I feel an automatic kinship, because I feel like a lot of us men really struggle and we get kind of locked up in our conditioning. So, I'm just grateful to have you here and pick your brain.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm glad you used the word conditioning, because I see that. It's funny. I was just on a call before we started, and we were talking about that very topic, how we're conditioned, especially, those of us who grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s didn't have a lot of strong men's figures. A lot of us didn't have, a lot of, dads were gone. So there's a whole generation or two of men who really have been missing men's, just nourishing men's relationships. So yeah, the conditioning is really important to address. Otherwise, it ends up being, unconscious and runs us in ways that we, don't often like.
Yeah, totally. So speaking of conditioning, I imagine you didn't always grow up this self-aware or this able to connect emotionally. So can you give us a little bit of a story of how you got into men's work and helping men, and when did you begin to get you had some problems and challenges as a man, and what did you do about it?
Yeah. Well, it's a there's a lot of twists and turns in this story. I was raised by primarily women. Both my grandfathers died when I was young, and my father kind of took off, and my stepfather was killed. So literally when I was 10, so literally every, male role model I had, either, died, kind of not a very particularly good death, or was gone, or, it was just very strange. So I didn't really get, like a lot of men, growing up, I didn't really get that there was anything missing. My mom was a loving single mom, and I had an aunt and grandmother, and, they basically raised me. So I always found myself real comfortable with women. But then as I grew older, I started to see that I had continual challenges with relationships. And also too, like the stuff, how to decide what to do with my life, and how to keep your word, for example, how to keep my word, how to show up for my commitments, how to communicate what I want, how to own my space, how to love a woman well. I mean, all the things that I think for millennia fathers have been teaching sons. I found myself on the outskirts, not quite knowing, and just really trying to figure it out myself. And I during my 20s, I turned to a lot of drugs and alcohol, and really just kind of, I think what I was doing was I learned later on that I had a lot of grief around not having a father, not having male role models, and a lot of pain. And so I did that. I killed it for about 15 years. I
killed it. Nice.
I rode that pony into the ground.
Yeah.
I got sober when I was, when I was 29, and I immediately fell into the men's groups. In Los Angeles, we're really blessed to have just stellar men's groups in sobriety. And so every day at lunch, there would be a group of men who would meet, all walks of life, all ages, all success levels. And I just met with these guys. I basically planned my whole life around showing up, because something told me that they had the answer, like how to live, and, the book that I felt like I never got.
Yeah.
And, and I guess a lot of guys feel that, like, no one gave me the book on how to show up as a man in the world. And when I was just shortly thereafter that, I met a girl, and I got her pregnant, and I had a daughter, and my daughter was born with a really challenging, ultimately fatal disease called cystic fibrosis. And so, my 30s were really spent learning how to show up for her, spent a lot of time in hospitals, it was just everything I could do to keep my shit together and not die of sadness.
Were you also married, or were you a single dad at this time?
Well, we were together for a few years, and then she relapsed and we split up, and then I was a single dad for a long time. We had 50-50 custody. I had to take full custody at one point. And the people who told me how to do that, actually, the guys from these groups are the ones that loaned me the money to get a lawyer. They're the ones that moved me out when I needed to move out. They're the ones that showed up and babysat when Claire was in the hospital and I had to work. So it was it was the first time in my life I actually really learned, I'm kind of feeling a little emotional about it now, I learned what it was like, to have men show up with nothing, no desire for anything in return, just like out of love.
Wow. And this was this like the first time you had men like this in your life?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And all guys, all guys that went through their own shit. So it wasn't like these guys were most of these guys went through a similar thing that I went through, but they had turned their lives around and really were showing up as fathers, as businessmen. And it was such a beautiful, I learned so much in those first, 10 years. And so my first introduction to men's work, so to speak, was really that, guys in recovery, just showing up for each other, and and not leaving anybody. When Claire got sick, they would bring meetings into the hospital for me.
Wow.
They would take up collections for us when we couldn't work. It was really it was really, I pray that, every man gets the experience of what it's like to have a group of, committed, conscious, loving men show up for them the way that these guys did for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Okay. So keep going. So your daughter has cystic fibrosis, which I'm guessing requires a certain level of parenting and management and care. And so that had its own challenges.
Yeah. I mean, we spent about a third of her life in the hospital. So,
Wow.
10, 15 surgeries. I know you're a dad, so you get it. Like, surgery after surgery, and really intense. She almost died a couple of times. When she was 14, she went into a coma and literally almost died. Was hanging on by a thread. And these are the guys that came every day. We'd pray in the basement and do breathing exercises for her, with like we were breathing for her, even though she could barely breathe. And it really, to this day, I'm convinced that these guys, helped save her life. That really had an impact on her, because there was a 1% chance of her making it. And the beautiful thing is that now she's 19. She's still dealing with cystic fibrosis, but we started a foundation. She now travels the world speaking.
Whoa.
She's done 2 TED Talks. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Google Claire Wineland, you'll see, what this girl's all about. And I'll tell you, it was the men who showed up who literally helped to parent her with me. That I think made her, the young woman that she is now. She's a beautiful force of nature. So that has a pretty happy ending. We still don't know. Cystic fibrosis is still fatal, and we don't know how long she has. But that was definitely, just such a huge piece of my story. And learning to be, early on, I had to learn. I remember one morning, Claire was in a coma, and I was just beside myself, and I called a friend of mine who's a spiritual practitioner, and I was just losing my shit, and I didn't know what to do. And he said to me, there's nothing wrong. This is just consciousness unfolding. And it was such a beautiful transmission, and such a, not that he didn't feel for me, but he just laid some spiritual depth at just the right moment. And I could feel like, this is consciousness unfolding. If Claire goes, then Claire goes. And that was sort of the first real experience I had with masculine spiritual practice, I guess I would call it. And it changed the whole texture of that hospital stay. And I was able to be there with her, to witness everything that was happening without getting too, attached, without falling apart. And it was a huge moment.
Wow. So just one comment from a male friend shifted something for you in the moment, and you from there on just had a different perspective.
Totally.
Wow.
One heartfelt, absolute, and from a guy who actually believed what he was telling me.
Yeah, he had experiential understanding.
Yeah, it just penetrated so deep that it did something to my heart and relaxed something in my heart. And ever since, there's been this relationship with death that I've had to journey with Claire on. And so I know if she was to go today or tomorrow, that we've loved. I could not ask for a better daughter. I would not change a thing. Everything that's happened has happened for a reason. And I feel like the luckiest father on the planet, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I have chills as I'm listening here. This is a beautiful story, and it helps me get something about you. I don't know you real well, but you have this kind of relaxed presence about you that I have a deeper understanding of in this moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a workshop, right? To be with a child for year after year of hospital visits. So it's like, man, that wears you down, and you get, some people probably freak out and go a certain direction with that, but it seems like I'm just thinking of it as a practice, like what a practice for you to be in that fire for so many years.
Yeah, for sure. And I would not have made it through dozens of times had the men in my life not shown up for me in the way they did. I'm forever grateful. And I think part of why I do what I do is there is a certain sense of wanting to pay that back, because not everybody's in recovery and has that opportunity, and not that anybody should be if they don't want to be, but not every man has that that resource. And I learned early on that this was the thing that, to me, felt was missing for a lot of men that I was seeing out, both sober and not, in the world.
Mm-hmm.
This sense of the nourishment that we get from being with each other and having, breaking down in front of another man and having him hold that space for you, and all you holding space for him breaking down. There's something deep in my nervous system, at least, that got healed in moments.
Yeah, I'm hearing there's a couple different directions. I want to come back to kind of where were the women in your life during this time,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the wife or the ex-wife or whatever was happening with the women. But I want to stay here for a minute also. So with the men, like if I'm a man listening, I'm like, well, yeah, but I have a bunch of male friends, and they are there for me, really. But I think a lot of men kid themselves on what male community is really, what's possible there. Can you speak a little bit about the difference between just kind of having a lot of bros or a lot of friends around, male friends, where we go watch the game, or we're semi-real with each other, versus what you're talking about? It feels like there's a pretty big difference here.
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make. I mean, I had a lot of bros too through college. I went to college, through high school, best friends, got high together, went to games together, played together. Had did all kinds of stuff together, and what the difference was that there was a depth, to something about a group of men whose commitment in joining together is to create depth in their life. And just having that, let's call it a sacred space where men are going to get together and talk about things like love and purpose and death and presence and,
sex,
stillness and sex and all of those things deepens the whole group, so that the texture of the conversation is different. And, I've been in a men's group, like just a men's group of peers here for 8 years now. And, every year we pick a theme that's on death or on God or on, whatever you want to call God, on love or on embodiment, and just having that kind of focus versus fantasy football or the other places we could go as men. Not that there's anything wrong with that, man. I mean, we all need to have fun, but having that in my life was really, like I said, I guess the only word I can think of is just nourishing, and it deepened me. I think that having them hold me there made me a deeper man.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, and how? Let's just kind of get practical for a minute. If a man is listening to this and he's like, I want that, but I don't have that, and how would a guy know that he's starting to get that, and what can he do to start to get that?
Yeah, I think that what I think is happening more and more, Jayson, is that men are starting to get called to it. Before, 10 years ago, when I started to run men's groups professionally, it wasn't really guys would just kind of stumble into it. But I think now there's actually, men are kind of starting to feel a pull towards being with other men. And there's more men, contacting me about starting men's groups and wanting to be in programs that I run about men's groups than ever before. And I think it's because something in them knows that this is an essential piece of support and growth that you need, even in the coaching community, where self-development, where people are constantly bettering themselves. I think a lot of men are realizing there's a whole different thing that happens when you're in a group of men, where you're not thinking about, now this is very heteronormative that I'm talking about, where you're not thinking about women or posturing for women or trying to do anything to impress women. There's a certain level of something that can happen. So I would say to any man listening, if you're feeling a pull or some intuitive tug towards a men's group, follow it. Find men, reach out to me, reach out to Jayson, reach out to other guys. There's, you can Google now, virtual men's groups and start to check out what's around.
Yep.
So I think that it's out there, and my suggestion would be, if you're feeling pulled, by all means, follow it. Don't let your head talk you out of it, or don't put it off. It can be a life-changing experience for sure.
Now let's zoom out again. Why, get back to the why for a minute. Why is this so essential in a guy's life? I mean, we've heard from you and your story a bit, and that sounds like, okay, that's pretty crucial. You're going through hard times. But what if my kid isn't in the hospital and I have a pretty good life and I get paid decent and overall things are okay, but maybe deep down I have this, um, longing for more, or something like you're saying, craving for depth. Why, like I've heard women even ask this, like, why do guys need to sit in a circle and be in a men's group? Like, what are you talking about? That sounds weird. Like, why do they need to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I don't think every guy does. I don't think every guy's called for it, and I don't want to claim that men, need this, because um, ultimately everybody's perfect right where they are. But I do think that there is uh, the only word I could think of is sort of a malnourishment, a sense that something, we're at this really critical juncture in history, right? Where the feminine is rising over the course of the next 50 to 100 years, if the planet survives. There will be more, in 50 years, there'll be more women lawyers, more women doctors, more politicians. And we're at this place where I think women are starting to rise in terms of, and I think it's probably a good thing. We've kind of fucked things up for thousands of years. But so men, I think, are naturally just questioning their value. Like, my value is not necessarily as a provider anymore, although many men do provide. But many women have the capacity to make their own money, to do everything that we do and better. How they can have children without us. So I think there's this kind of mass questioning happening that I see. And again, I think that for the men who feel, a lot of guys that come to me, they've had a lot of success. They're either in marriages and they don't quite know how to make their partner happy or make their marriage work, or they've accomplished a lot in their life and yet they still feel like there's something deeper that they're meant to be bringing into the world, or they just are craving a deeper expression of their own consciousness. And so I think that those are problems that I guess most guys have to some degree or another. And what they don't get, I think, what they don't actually know is possible, that men's groups, if they're done well, address a lot of that. And, iron sharpens iron. I do believe that, and I've seen that now for a long time, that when I'm following my conditioning, to go back to that conversation, when I'm following my conditioning, I'm unconscious to it, right?
Yeah.
I can't be my own best teacher. But if I have a group of 5 or 6 men that I trust, that know me, and they can look at me and say, listen, man, that's a bad direction for you to go. And I've got 4 or 5 guys saying the same thing. It's really hard for me to just, say one guy, say, oh, you're just projecting.
Yeah.
And so it's a way for men to really train and allow for the best in themselves as mirrored from other men who are wanting to do the same. And, to me, of course, men don't have to do this, but shit, I don't want to live any other way. I want to bring the best I've got to bring in this very short period I have on the planet. And if I can have a group of men who are going to call me on my bullshit, I certainly want that in my corner.
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like men's groups are definitely part of the card that you need to have to get into a men's group is you got to be willing to look at yourself and grow, right? And be open to feedback, or it's probably not going to work for you. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, because your shit's gonna come up, man. I mean, any father issues, any guy, any father issue is gonna come up. Any mistrust you have around men, which again, for guys growing up, I don't know if you read the book No More Mr. Nice Guy, but he does touch. I don't agree with all of it, but he does touch on a few key points, which are that you've got generations of men now who don't necessarily who weren't raised to trust men, who didn't have trustable masculine presence in their lives. And so your mistrust of men comes up, and it actually impacts every area of your life. It impacts your relationships. It impacts your capacity to make money in the world. And I think I put this into the category of, we don't know what we don't know. And although I think that, guys like you and Tripp, myself to some degree, we're sort of starting to emanate something in the world that people see and they're like, wow, like those guys actually, they're in relationships that work. They're good fathers, they're giving back. And I think it's the men who are doing the work are transmitting in a way that other men are just kind of drawn to it.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I think that's really true. I know in my own life, that's who I seek out, right? I seek out a transmission that I'm just into, and that's who I want to go learn from.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, okay. And if let's kind of back up a minute on your story in your 20s, let's say, or excuse me, your 30s, you start getting all this support from the men. Were you also getting support from women, or were they just kind of not in the picture?
Well, that's the rub. So there were women in the picture. I was married. So even though I was getting all the support for Claire and I was getting a lot of support, from men, my relationships were still a fucking mess. And so Claire's mother and I, didn't end up doing too well. I remarried and was with a woman for 6 years, and that ended pretty badly. And so here I was, in my late 30s going, oh shit, like I really don't know how to show up in relationship. I had no model. My father took off. I had no model. So it literally wasn't installed in my nervous system when I was young. So I realized that I needed some help. And so I sought out some teachers that, that really were experts in this area, like what it means to be a man in relationship, not just in the world or as a father, but in relationship. Because as you know, there's a different set of skills to show up as a man in relationship versus just showing up in the world, right? And nobody teaches us these skills. Very few people do. So I found some teachers that I really, really trusted, and I just dove in. It just felt, again, it was one of those moments where, when you kind of hit the right path and your whole body lights up and you're just like, okay, I want more of this. Fuck, I'll go wherever. So I followed my teachers around for 8 years and studied with them and trained with them as best I could, and learned how to, learn specifically the skills of what it means to hold space for a woman, to lead a woman well, to be present for a woman, how to have good sex, all of these things that are actually skill sets that are more important than being able to, in my opinion, at least, be able to make a living, right? There's the what I call the myth of the good husband, and these guys come to me all the time. They like, I make money, I take care of her, I'm a good father, I show, I support her career, and yet we're still really unhappy. And that was me.
Yeah.
So I dove into a different kind of men's practice, what I would call embodied men's work, and started to learn everything I could there. And then started, after I'd been doing it and training for about 5 years, I started to teach my own men's groups. And that's, those two threads are very, both really, they're streams that feed the work that I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can I interrupt you there? It sounds like during the 30s, this hard phase where you were getting all this support from men, and your female relationships were really challenged. I'm hearing that it's almost like, what's that, kind of? Yeah.
Kindly, man.
All right. We're really challenging. Okay, fine. I wonder if you also, tell me if this is true, that you also just felt safer with guys. Like you just felt something was easier there and you could lean on that support, whereas the women thing was more complicated. You hadn't learned that skill yet.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, men were easy. I could show up anytime and be whatever I was. And I also found that until I found a group of men who were really dedicated to what it's like to be a man, a man in relationship, the guys that I counted on also didn't learn what I didn't learn. And so again, I found that there's a very small group of men who literally practice the skill set of loving well. And so I literally I was not, the information I was getting from the men I relied on in the past was not serving me. So I had to expand my circle and my studies. And so I traveled, I did work with everybody I could find whose message resonated with me. And I really became obsessed kind of what it's like to show up as a man in relationship. Because I think part of me knew that to really heal, that had to happen. Like I couldn't just make money in the world. I couldn't just be a good dad. I really had to heal my romantic relationships. And I believe now that the deepest spiritual work I do is in my relationship, without a doubt.
Yeah, I'm with you. Absolutely, hands down. Wow. So I love that. There's a really important point here for the men listening too, is that it's possible you get to a phase where you outgrow your male circle of friends because they just can't teach you the skill you're wanting and they don't actually know it themselves. So what I get from John here is that you realized that and you moved on to find teachers and a community of men that was in that conversation because you wanted to master a skill and learn a skill you didn't have.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of guys who I find who come to me now are in that boat where they're kind of confused. Like, wait a minute, like I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing as a man, and yet I'm still unable to have the kind of bliss or the kind of depth or the kind of sex or the kind of love that I intuit is available in the world. So I had to find different guys.
Yeah, and I will say, I want to just insert here that for the women listening, that it's not that men can't learn how to do relationship with a woman in a relationship. That can also happen. He doesn't need to like go hang with the bros or go to a men's group or anything. It can happen, but for a lot of men, for whatever reason, they have some kind of, and maybe women too, but there's some kind of block there where it might be easier for certain men to go learn. I was told, I think it was David Data or someone said, if you can learn how to be intimate with men, then you can learn how to be intimate with women. But you got to do the men's thing first.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that that's a hard and fact truth, because that's just not my experience with some people. They can actually learn to go really deep with a woman and have like no male friends. That can happen. But I think it is the majority of the time I'm seeing that is true. That like if you can learn how to connect with other men, it just dramatically improves your intimacy with a woman.
Absolutely. And I also think too, that, there's a limbic piece to it. We're still, our triune brains still run the show for the most part. And if you go back 10,000 years, the men who were most trusted in the tribes were men who other men trusted, right? I see a lot of men who develop the skill. I mean, in the pickup community, you see it all the time. They develop the skill to earn a woman's trust, valued or not. And yet there's still something in them that a man would not look at and say that's trustable.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important, some guys don't care about that, and that's cool, right? But I think a lot of men are really aching for their own nobility. They're aching to be deeper than they are, and I would agree with you that start with men. That's been my rallying cry. Start with men, and you might only need a few weekends of it or a few meetings or whatever, but you can't lose bringing that back into your relationship. I rarely have seen that happen.
Yeah. What do you recommend to a woman who's with a guy who's resistant to the men's work, and she's like hearing you talk right now, John, and she's like, hell yes, I want my guy in John's group. I want my guy to go join a men's group. Oh my God, that would be amazing. That's so good for him. And she intuitively knows that this is spot on, but he has a big block around his conditioning. He thinks it's gay, or he thinks it's like too new agey or whatever. Like, what do you say to that woman?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I normally say, leave it alone. There are tricks to the trade. Like, for example, I've heard David Data say, like, you can be reading a book that you love about men's work or about relationship, and you can just be showing him how good it makes you feel while you're reading it. And eventually he'll go, wow, what's that? What are you reading? And she can say, oh, this book that's just really great about relationship, and I'm just learning so much about it. And then she puts it down. And eventually men will get the picture. But I do think that there's a certain level of, I think that it backfires, I guess is the best way I can put it, to tell a man that he should go to a men's group. Because in my opinion, you're actually then taking the lead which most women don't actually want to do.
Yeah.
You're telling him he's missing something, which most men don't respond really well to. And what you can do as a woman is you can show him how painful it is when he's not present, right? If he's unconscious or not present, you certainly can, express heartfully and hopefully with some art, how painful it is for you. And that's something that I try to encourage, because I teach co-ed work as well, and I work with a lot of couples. I really try to teach the women to express as in the moment as possible that it's painful when he's, checked out or on his phone all the time or looking at TV. But it's hard, man. Yeah. I mean, I really can't think of a way for them to say, hey, go check out a men's group, other than very clandestinely and very, very artfully and very carefully.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that was a good safe answer, man. Yeah, it's true though. It can be tricky with a man who has a block, conscious or unconscious, and he doesn't see value in it. There's not a lot you can do, but I really liked your suggestions, and especially men are motivated by pain, and if they see, especially guys that want to do a good job and want to be a good, quote, good partner, good husband, whatever, if they see you in a lot of pain, they're open enough to go, oh, it's my behavior is causing this pain. Like, damn, I want to change that. That can be motivating.
Totally. I think that men, most good men that I run into really want to love well. The problem I find, and the problem I see is that, women will bring the skills, directness, that they've learned in the workplace or just growing up in sort of a post-feminine era, and they'll try to apply those skills to telling the men what they should do, and that doesn't necessarily, it's not that they're wrong, but it's just not incredibly effective. It causes more pain than good, I think.
Yeah, great. Will you, just a couple more points here before we wrap up, will you speak to leadership in a relationship? You mentioned a minute ago, I thought I heard you say something about you don't want her to necessarily be the leader here. Will you unpack that a little more and talk about leadership within like a couple?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of my favorite topics. I'm actually writing a book on it, and I think that it starts with a man's capacity to lead in the moment, and so a lot of the work that I do is work on getting men into their bodies so that they can actually feel what's happening in the present moment. So most men are trained to avoid their woman's pain, right? Most men are trained to turn away from it, and so the first thing to do is to start to train our bodies and our nervous systems to actually lean into it and get curious, like, wow, baby, it feels like you're hurting, or it feels like you're in a lot of pain, and then start to, lead from that place of discovering what's wrong. And so I think there's a lot of different layers. One of them is yogic, right, which is working on our feeling bodies so that we can feel what needs to happen in any moment or what's really happening in the relationship. And that's a very specific set of skills. Some of them are meditative, some of them are yogic, some of them are just embodied practice. And then the place I always try to tell men to start is if they take 100% responsibility for the culture that has developed in the relationship, they have a much better chance of leading from that place. Mm-hmm. So most men in my opinion have some story about where they're not appreciated or respected, and that's probably true in many ways, but it goes nowhere. So leadership to me starts in two places. One is getting in your body enough to rest in the present moment and feel what needs to happen. What can I do to create love right now? What can I do to lead her to relax or open up? What can I do to lead the relationship so that we communicate better? All of that stuff is a product of feeling. And the second piece is to be able to get clear on where I've allowed a culture of, let's say, argument. Like, so if I allow arguments to devolve into name calling and nastiness, well, I could either blame her for calling me an asshole, or I could own it and say, you know what, I've allowed this culture to develop in our relationship where we're fighting really nasty. And I want it to stop now. And here's what I suggest we do. And from that place, there's just I think women just respect it, relax into it, trust it. And so owning our culture, owning the culture that we co-created and sort of allowed to develop in our relationship is a great place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine being, for the women listeners here that are in the hetero camp, imagine if your guy did that. Imagine if he just had a shift, and because he listened to John here, and he's like, okay, I'm going to take responsibility. Honey, I fucked up. I've allowed this to go on, and I'm going to do something about it. And then his actions and his body follows through with that, and he demonstrates day in and day out that he's up for the new game, a new culture, and he creates it. Like, imagine how much she would like relax and open up, right?
Yeah.
And it just sounds so good as you talk about it. I'm like, Jesus, that's, yeah. I mean, don't we all want a partner who can take ownership and help, just help the system calm down? And I hear you challenging the men to step into that leader role.
Yeah, and of course women have their part too. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but if we set an example, what I see more often than not is when she feels that I'm taking responsibility for what's going on in the relationship, and sees that I feel it, I know it, I'm identifying it, I'm not ignoring it, then yeah, the part of her that's still very drawn to connection, because I do believe the feminine is driven by connection, right? The part of her heart can relax and allow me to suggest some different ways to do it, and then she can tell me how it feels. Does that feel good? What if we did it this way? Would that feel better? And if I'm a good leader, I'll incorporate that and just kind of navigate the seas that way, always kind of checking back into, here's what I think would work for us, my love. How does that feel? So there's, the topic of leadership, I think we could go on for shit, man. We could do a whole weekend just on, good masculine leadership and relationship, because I think it's such a deep topic.
Yeah.
And it's just everything. It touches how we lead in our relationship tends to be how we lead in our businesses and how we lead in our life, and where we don't, you know what I mean? It's not just in relationship.
That's right. Yeah. And I want to really underline a point you said there at the beginning of the leadership conversation, which is, instead of turning away from a woman's pain and her emotions, learn to slowly turn around and get comfortable with turning toward the emotional upheaval, the discomfort, the whatever's going on, and being like, can you stay in your body? Can you stay present? I mean, that alone right there, we could do a weekend on that, right?
Yeah, right.
And that is such an essential skill that I've definitely had to learn for a long time, because that was what ended my relationships, right? Is I just could not handle any kind of emotional upset. I would just turn away. I was out. See ya. And I would make the woman wrong, and I was like gone.
Yeah.
And what shifted it was, finally I was like, okay, fine. Not only did I take responsibility, but I was finally willing to turn toward the discomfort and toward the emotions, which I had to obviously do quite a bit of work on myself. But man, what a fucking game-changing move that is.
It's a complete game-changing move, and it just does so much. There's all kinds of reasons why. I mean, some of these are evolutionary biology, but when a man's in fight or flight because his nervous system can't handle that much emotion, what gets triggered in a woman's brain is often reptilian, which is, if he leaves, I'm left with children kicked out of the tribe. I mean, I know this is not rational, but this stuff is still happening in our brains, right? And so men don't understand, that when we do leave, it does trigger something very old and deep, oftentimes in the feminine brain. And if we're not compassionate about that, and we just kind of, have them fix their own problems, there's an opportunity missed for some real deep intimacy that's on the other side of that, as you said.
Yeah, I'm with you, man.
One piece I think that's important that goes back to the first part of our conversation is that I've found that men who have trouble with their own emotional bodies, right? Men who judge their own emotionality or their own reactivity and can't be with their own strong emotions first, which you learn in a men's group, by the way, good men's group.
Yeah.
And then their capacity, they can't show up for a woman that way.
Yeah.
So they really do have to do the deep inner work themselves and then bring it to their relationship. And that is not an easy thing to do, to be able to, train your nervous system to stay when you want to leave.
Yeah, and I think a men's group is in a way like the on ramp to finally be able to stand in the face of your female partner's strong emotional upset. Is a men's group is the training ground to like hold your hand in your own emotional upset and other men's upset, so that you get more and more okay with it. Because we boys grew up in a culture where that was made fun of and it was a big fat problem. So we have to undo all of that, and one of the fastest ways to do that is what you're saying, is like be with other men and learn how to be okay to feel there, and then that's going to allow you to feel with your woman.
Totally. And meditation and some yogic practice, strengthen our nervous system, strengthen our capacity to just hold. Women can come in with a lot of energy, and if our nervous systems aren't trained, like we don't do some sort of physical practice to train our nervous systems, I find that it's like a circuit gets blown. You can only take so much electricity through the system, and then we have circuits that get blown. So there's a physical aspect to it. I'd say, a practice aspect to it as well.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and a little disclaimer here that just back to the kind of gender-fied conversation here is that it's really in my world now as a husband and as a dad and been, married 9 years, together 13, it's really up to my wife to lead sometimes and me up to lead sometimes. We both do that for each other. Like it's not like it's just the man's job. I just want to throw that in my world. It may be different for you. But a strong partnership, both parties are able to calm the other person down through their presence, right?
Yeah, sure. I think that you hit on a really good point, which is that a good relationship, you're spending more time caressing and nourishing the other person's nervous system versus innervating it.
Yeah.
And that, again, that takes a commitment to generosity, a commitment to practicing when you want to close and run away, and a commitment to taking the lead sometimes. I have my partner is a really powerful woman in the world. And there are times when the best leadership I have is, I don't know what to do, baby. You take the lead on this.
Yeah, that's right.
But in doing that, I'm leading. I'm saying, I am not abdicating and just expecting her to do it, which often pisses women off. If we abdicate leadership too much and don't acknowledge it, at least, hey, I can't lead today. You tell me. I think that's a little art form that men can also use more.
Yeah, that's great. Cool, John. What's a good next step if you were to just suggest? I want to get to your men's groups in a minute,
Sure.
But what? Just another maybe tip for the men out there on where they can. Just a good first step to learn this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's people who've written books on this. David Data, you mentioned, has written some books on this stuff, and I actually tend to like Blue Truth a lot, because it's a really beautiful discussion of staying open in relationship, and so that's a book that I love a lot. I also love the work of Chogyam Trungpa a lot, who's pretty prolific about how to be with yourself with unconditional kindness and friendliness. Mm-hmm. And I think those kinds of practices, just in terms of, masculine spiritual teaching, I think those are two great places to start. And then find men who seem to have what you want, and and take a year and go find out how they did it. Take a year and learn from them, and or jump into a program, and there are a lot of good men starting to make livings doing this, myself, and I think to some degree you included, where we're teaching men and women some of these skills, and so we're not as hard to find as we used to be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, those are great suggestions, and I love the one about find men that you want to be like, because men have no problem doing that when it comes to money, for example, or fitness. It's like, cool, there's a big buff guy at the gym, I'll go follow him around. But when it comes to our emotions, that's like one of this unexplored domains for a lot of men. But find a man in your world, in your circle or at work or somewhere in your life that has that emotional depth that John is bringing here, and even ask him like, hey dude, can I take you to lunch? You got something going on here. That's what actually I did that in grad school. I went up to this guy and I was like, I just loved the way he was being in his body, and I had no idea, I had no words for it at the time. I was just like, that guy is like attractive in this certain way. He's carrying something I don't have. And I went up to him after class and I was like, you strike me as someone who has done a lot of work on himself, and I just like your vibe. How did you do that?
Mm.
And then we got into this conversation about men's groups, and then I got into a men's group with that guy like within 6 months.
Wow. Yeah. That's it. That's just if guys listening and they want to start, that's a great place to start, just like that.
Yeah. Cool. All right, John, where can people find out more about you? And I know you have an upcoming web class. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where we can find you?
Yeah. So I wanted to do a bigger group, sort of a community of men around the world. That's a year-long program. So I started the Embodied Men's Leadership Training Program, and it's a year-long program. Starts January 1st, although there's a kickoff December 5th. And it's 3 men's weekends where we do a lot of the practice that Jayson and I are talking about. And then a couple calls a month where we dive into everything from sexual polarity, intimate communication, money, purpose, meditation, embodiment, and the like. And I wanted to make it a year because I really feel like a year is sort of the sweet spot of steeping in the environment. And then if I had my druthers, some of these men will go out and start their own men's groups with some of the skills that I teach, and that would make me really happy.
Yeah, nice. And so this is 3 live weekends in LA?
One's in LA, one's in New York, one's in London.
Oh, cool.
There's guys in Europe, there's guys on the East Coast, there's guys on the West Coast. Yeah, so it's the guys that have signed up so far are men's group leaders, coaches, teachers, a rabbi. I mean, like, it's a pretty groovy group. Nice. Of men that have signed up from all over the world, and I'm really excited to do this.
Awesome, man. It's inspiring. And tell us about this December 5th call. If a guy wants to get on that, where does he find you and the year-long training?
Yeah, he can go to my website, which is John Wineland, wine like you drink, land like you live on.com. And right on the front page, there's a link to the application for and information about the Embodied Men's Leadership Training. And if you want to sign up, before December 5th, and you can be on that call, and that call is going to be all about clarifying your purpose in the world and what we wanted to get some momentum going into the new year. And that you can contact me. My email's on the website, so you can email me directly if you want. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, cool. And we'll include that all that info in the show notes. Awesome, John. Well, it's been a treat hanging out with you, getting to know you a little more, and I just really appreciate who you are and what you're up to in the world.
Thank you, Jayson. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad we finally had some space to do this.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes. All right, what is this big secret weapon that John and I talked about? What was the theme there? The secret weapon is men's groups, a male community that has your back, that will challenge you and support you to go to the next level in your emotional intimacy as well as your life. Okay, nice. Here's your action step. If you're a man and you're listening to this, your action step is this. Make a list of all your male friends. Okay, you got 200, list them all. 20, list them. 2, list them. Write them all down and rank them in order of who is the most no bullshit friend I have that would be there for me if I had an emergency, and who would have the capacity to emotionally support me. And who wouldn't just come in and try to rescue me or fix me or tell me to suck it up, but who would actually emotionally be there for me. Put that guy at the top. And just again, rank them. Rank your friends. Who is the most trustworthy friend I have in my life that can not only would be there for me, like if in a car accident, or if I had to go to the hospital, but would take over and parent my kids while I was at war or whatever. Like, who is the guy or guys that would step in. Okay, you can also think of questions like, if I got a divorce right now, or if I wanted to confide in a male friend about the fact that I'm losing my erection in my sex life, or that I want to get a divorce, or that I'm having an affair right now, or that my wife's having an affair, or, I'm bankrupt. I just lost all my money, or I'm broke and in debt, but I'm hiding all of that from my friends. Whatever you're hiding from your male friends, who is the friend that you would want to tell and that you think could actually handle it? And who wouldn't judge you, but who would be like, okay, got it, you're broke. Well, what are you going to do about it? How do we deal, man? Or it would actually say, how's that feel? That sounds pretty intense. Tell me more. Okay, that kind of friend. Rank them. And if you don't have a man on that list, notice that. If you have plenty of male friends, but not one of them you would trust with the most sacred, scary, vulnerable share, that's good information, right? It's like, wow, I don't have anyone in my life that I could tell the truth to. Damn, yikes. Okay, you want to know that, because that's basically what we're doing here, is assessing your own men's group, right? You're not in one, let's say, but your circle of men, how solid are they? And this is just a reflection of you. So based on that, it tells you a lot about yourself, what kind of man you choose to be around. Look, and if you're honest and you look in the mirror, you are in pain in some area of your life and maybe ashamed and feel insecure or inadequate, if you're honest, right? I certainly have had that my entire life. There's always some area where I feel insecure or inadequate. That's just true. And I work on those areas, right? Wherever I feel weak, I work on them. So find and identify the men in your life who are willing to find out about your insecurities and inadequacies, and you're willing to tell. And next step 2, is to go there. Go there. I challenge you right now to go have that difficult conversation with that man and say, look, man, I'm in debt and I'm scared. I haven't told anyone. Or, hey, me and my wife haven't had sex in 3 years. And we put on a happy face in front of you. It seems like everything's fine, but it's not fine. Or whatever is true that's scary and vulnerable. Okay, you're alone and you're hiding out. So we're just encouraging you to not do that. And what John is teaching here is the power, when you start going there, the power of that is unbelievable, right? It's really, really strong. It changed my life permanently when I finally found male friends that I could go there with. A lot of male friends will unconsciously collude in mediocrity and lack of depth in conversation. It's about the game, it's about your job, it's about the weather, and that's it. So see if you can go a little deeper, right? Finally, check out John's programs, right? The dude is clearly going to lead a powerful year-long training. It's going to be awesome. I'm certain of it. I don't even know. I have no direct experience other than my experience of him is that he's going to bring it. So check him out, johnwineland.com. Now, if you want to dip your toe in the water here, I have a free virtual men's group. It's totally free. You can start experimenting, okay? And that's, you go to jasongaddis.com/cocktalk, all right? And cocktalk is a filter. So if you can't handle talking about your cock in front of another man, it's just a good filter. It's like, wow, I'm not quite ready for that conversation. No problem. Don't join. If you want to join and take a risk, go to that page, jasongaddis.com/cocktalk, and you'll get some emails and you'll be asked to join a Facebook group. You'll be invited. You don't have to join. And there's some really edgy and fun and interesting conversations that go on in that group about relationships, about sex, about your purpose. And it's kind of a warm-up for something like John's program if you're not quite ready for that. All right. And I think you'll find that that's helpful in your life. If you're feeling alone and isolated, then go check that out. All right. Okay. Hopefully this was helpful for the men and women, and more will be coming I love men. I love trying to help men. I was so emotionally jammed up in my life that I needed other men to help me. I couldn't just rely on women. So, really grateful for the women in my life who did help me and the men that just kicked ass when I finally was willing to show that I had a need and that I needed help. So, right on, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, morning, and we'll talk soon.